So I wanted to do that, and I've got a really good friend named Dalrock. I don't know if you've ever checked out any of his work, but he's a Christian guy. I'm presuming, I know he's Protestant. I'm pretty sure he's evangelical. There's a lot of guys in what we call the Christo-manosphere, and these guys are they understand and they accept a lot of what the red pill has to say. They they make the same conclusions that you and I do, of course, is that religion used to be a buffer for hypergamy. It used to be a buffer for social, social things. But they don't embrace like the pickup artist aspect of it, of course, but they understand the intersexual dynamics that we talk about. And I really wanted to add that in there, but then I started reading Dalrock's blog and he was doing it better than I could. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to leave that up to Dalrock. But for at least the last 10 or 12 years, I've realized that there's a definite need for a book or a better understanding of how the red pill, as intersexual dynamics, how the red pill dovetails or incorporates into mainstream religions. Because I kept seeing story after story of how feminism and how, because we live in a feminine primary social order, how is that social order infiltrating and assimilating mainstream religions. And so that's what I dedicated the book to at first, and I'm still going to do this. This is still part of the book, but I had guys who were Christian guys saying, I'm red pill and I understand and I see all this stuff, but I don't believe in premarital sex. Can I still practice game? And the answer to that is, of course, yes, you can. You're just handicapped in that you can't spin plates or you can't be as non-exclusive as somebody who wouldn't. Do the principles still apply? Yes, of course they do. But I had so many guys hitting me up from the Christian sphere to ask me and to get advice for how things are in their church. Like they would hit me up and they would say, everything in my church has become like I've got my red pill lens on and I'm seeing things for the first time in the church, and I'm seeing how corrupt our church has become and how corrupt our faith has become because we've allowed women into positions of authority within the church, and they are using that authority to reform and redesign that religion into something that is more acceptable to the feminine imperative. Right. So that was my starting point for the book. It goes into a lot more than just that, but it's been my experience. One of the main themes of the book is how the gynocracy, how the feminine primary social order has assimilated mainstream religion as part of its expansion and its power consolidation. So when I see like a Presbyterian minister who's female saying that God isn't male, or saying that you don't have to believe in Jesus to go to heaven, and she still calls herself a Christian, and basically denying articles of faith that you would associate with that particular religion. And just because she's a woman, she gets to go and say, your faith is no longer valid, and this is what the new faith is going to be. Right. And I see that in I don't want to just pick on Christianity, because this is I've interviewed Jews, I've interviewed Muslims, I've interviewed Christian guys, I've interviewed I'm actually starting to interview people who are familiar with the Hare Krishna movement, because Krishna is a really big deal now to Western women, because it is very for whatever reason, I think the Krishna side of Hinduism has embraced the feminine imperative, and they're using that as sort of a recruitment effort to get Western women into the Krishna movement, which is weird to me, but now I'm sort of like studying that. But in all of these religions, what I'm seeing is the females will come to a position of authority. They will, and usually this is through the church culture. And so they will get into the church culture, and feminism will get into that church culture. And because women are the primary consumers in the United States, most churches, and I'm not just picking on Christianity, but most churches are businesses, they're franchises. And to stay solvent, to keep the lights on, to keep the tithe checks coming in, the message has to be catered to the prime demographic of that business, which is the women. You have to tell the women what they want to hear. And what they want to hear is female empowerment, because that's all they've ever been brought up with from the time they were, 6 years old. So what do pastors do is they incorporate that feminist part of church culture into the doctrine. And so the doctrine is now we're going to talk about how men and women ought to behave from a religious perspective. And our doctrine is changing now. We're going to allow women to be teachers. We're going to put women into positions of authority. We're going to ordain them as ministers. We're going to ordain them as whatever church leader it is. And we're going to grant them the ability to come up here and teach the masses, kind of thing, even though our holy books say that we should never do that. That they directly forbid that. But you know what? This is 2019, so we're going to make that change, and we feel pretty confident in that. And so what you do is when women get into that position, they've changed the doctrine, and then eventually, over the course of about a generation, they end up changing the faith. And I think right now we're seeing the mainstream faiths be restructured to be more feminine compliant, or more compliant with the female imperative. And so you'll see, like I've been following this one, I think she's Lutheran, but she's got tats and she looks like a lesbian, and she's got the short hair and she looks like a biker chick. And I can't remember her name off the top of my head right now, but she just went through I think it was last year, she melted down a whole bunch of purity rings and had them reforged into a giant effigy of a vagina. And she gave the platinum vagina to Gloria Steinem. And this is all in a church, all under the auspices of it being part of Christianity. And this is the new Christianity. And this is where we're going with this now. And in every case, in every female religious leader that I follow, that's the case. That's the story. It doesn't change. As the woman gets into a position of authority, and then they reform the religion to fit feminism, but also to fit a Unitarian Universalist outlook. So it's always about, let's make the tent big. It doesn't matter what you believe in. God's not a man. You don't have to believe in Jesus to go to heaven. Just come on in here, and everything, we're all gonna, it's the church of Oprah. It's this multi interfaith church is what it ends up becoming. So you have a church that might, like Catholicism might have been a church that's been around for thousands of years. Now, because a woman in 2019 says, come on in here, things are different. You should look this up. I want you to look this up at some point. There's a church in San Francisco, and I can't remember the name of it. I think it used to be a Catholic church, but they have what's called the Beyonce services, or the Beyonce worship services. And what it is it's exactly that. It's a female church leadership that opened the doors and basically turned the church into a nightclub. And it's a celebration of multiculturalism, and it doesn't matter what your faith is, just come on in here. And everything that was hard and fast rules about that particular faith are just thrown out the window. And it doesn't matter if it was Lutheran or Presbyterian or Methodist or Church of Christ or whatever it is. And I see this even in really hardcore evangelicals now. You got someone like Beth Moore, who is fundamentally changing that religion because she's been allowed to go from being a women's ministry leader to being somebody who is running a church, or who is in charge of the message of that church. And now you're going, I would not be surprised to hear that Beth Moore, or somebody like her, is considered heretical, or is considered more mainstream, more Unitarian. And by Unitarian, I mean, like, it doesn't matter what your faith is, you just get in the doors here because it's a business. Once again, it's like, we need more people in here, we need more tithe checks, we need people to support this, it's tax exempt, why not? Let's get it. Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you erase all of the things that were limitations to that? And well, of course, because it's faith. But we've so many people have lost faith right now that I think that that they still want that unity, they still want that tribal affiliation, they still want to be able to gather together and be, what is it, spiritual but not religious,
Yeah, what a joke.
And what I also find interesting, also, that in my studies for this one, is that men have left the church in droves. The church demographics is it's funny because it's like 80% women and 20% men, and the men that are there are towing the feminist line. They're the ones there who are giving the Mother's Day sermons that praise women, and the Father's Day sermons that say, men, you need to measure up, you're not doing a good enough job, there's something wrong with you men folk, you know, God is our father, but you know, he's a perfect father unlike you men. You know, those not so subtle messages that go along with that. Whenever I listen to pastors talking about issues of intersexual dynamics, or like how men should marry women, or how men should treat women, or how women should, it's always how men should treat women. It's never about how women should treat men. And I think that as a response to that, men are saying there's nothing for me here anymore. I believe that fervently right now, is that men are leaving the church because there's nothing there for them. There's nothing spiritual there for them. There's nothing faith there for them, because their faith is being converted into, you know, whatever the feminine imperative wants it to be. And in fact, their old churches are actively hostile to the men that are in that church, in that they are told that they need to man up, and there's always this constant qualification. And oddly enough, that qualification coincides with how women qualify men for their hypergamous choices. And so it's like, you're not measuring up, you're not as good, you're not as good as you could be. And if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And they end up conflating the woman's will, or the whatever, they end up conflating the feminine imperative with the Holy Spirit, right? So the women in the church end up becoming the intermediary between the man and God. So if the woman is upset with the man, if the woman is not putting out for the guy, if the guy is not doing what the woman wants to do, it means that God is displeased with the man via the woman, going through the woman,
which is backwards.
Yes, very, very much so, because usually it's men need to be the spiritual heads of it's headship, right? But so we've reversed that, and we have I have heard in my research here, I've heard, you know, church leaders, guys from Focus on the Family, say that women are closer to God than men are. And I think that that's a really dangerous precedent to set in churches right now, because what that means is that women dictate the word of God. Women will tell you what God means, and if you don't do what she says, and if you don't measure up to what the feminine imperative has taught her that men should measure up to, then God is displeased with you. And so now you add this element of metaphysics to the whole thing, and
it's existential now.
Yeah, and I find that most guys who are in the church are there for two reasons. They were boys that were raised in that culture, they were raised in churches, or else they are men who are married to women who go to church, who drag them into the church. Very, very few men, young men, go to church on their own volition. They are either dragged there or they were born there.